Alright, let's get started. Thank you everyone for coming. Today we'll have the part 3 of the Case Interviews Cracked series. And today we'll focus on profitability cases. This is one of the classic quintessential case interview that you would be getting. And it also mimics some of the classic cases that you solve during your tenure as a consultant.
So, quick recap of guesstimates, which is something that we did yesterday. We looked at three main approaches at solving guesstimates. The first one was your demand side approach, right? We started off, right? Switch off the lights. Okay. What? ये इधर का बनेगा ये दोनों all right, is it good now? ठीक हाँ ये वो भी कर दो बंद ये वाला
ठीक है ना, उसके आगे तो जाएगा नहीं होगा।
Let's just wait till we sort of settle down here. And ठीक है.
Alright, looks good.
All right, is this better? ठीक है. So we did guesstimates yesterday, and we looked at three main approaches. The first one was demand side. We started off with the population and broke it down using a few filters. Right? We also looked at an example which was solved the same way. Second one was supply side constraints. Typically apply this when your supply side has a production limitation or so on, and that sort of determines how far you can go. And finally, context specific things like how many bowling balls can you fit in this room and so on. So these were the three main approaches that we looked for guesstimates. Let's start with profitability for today, right?
Alright, so let's look at profitability cases. So we just zoom into that. Profitability cases are essentially cases which use a standard framework called a profit framework. And it's really very simple. So if you break profit into its component parts, it's essentially revenue minus costs. We'll be going more into detail as to how you can further break up revenue and costs later. But the reason we call it profitability cases is because you're essentially using one part or the entire part of this framework.
Let's look at a few examples here. So our favorite example, your grocery retailer is your client, right? And the profits are down by 20%. How do you turn around this situation? This is a typical profitability problem, right? Another example can be you have your juice manufacturer as your client, and the profits, there are no comments about the profits, but the sales have gone down, right? So even this sort of falls into the profitability bucket. Remember that there can be a problem or there can be an interview where you're told that there is no real problem as such, but the client is just being optimistic and wants to increase his profits. Even that is a profitability problem, and typically candidates get confused as to how to approach such a problem. But remember, when we are going through the frameworks today, that too falls under this particular section, right? So let's look at the basic profitability framework.
So let's look at how we can further go down the profitability framework. So we start with profit, and then we can break it as revenue and cost. Now if you look at each of the branches, a good way to break revenue would be total number of units multiplied by the average price per unit. Often at times that you can have a client who has multiple revenue streams. Let's say they are selling different types of products. They're selling an air conditioner, they're selling a toaster, and they're also selling, let's say, a microwave oven. In that case, you can ask the interviewer often that, are there any revenue streams that I should be aware of? And if he tells you the three different types of products, then you can first divide your revenue across those products, segments, and then further segregate each of those segments as number of units multiplied by average price per unit. So that's largely on the revenue side. If we now look at the cost side, you essentially have two types of costs for most businesses. And a good way to classify them are fixed costs and variable costs. So fixed costs, as the name suggests, are costs that don't vary with the amount of sales that you do. Or for every extra unit that you sell, the fixed costs don't vary. So let's say you have a grocery retailer again and they're selling all sorts of groceries. The fixed costs out here would typically be things like the rent, for which you have an annual lease, and no matter how much sales you do out of your store, it's going to be a fixed cost for you. It can also be possibly the labor that you employ in that shop, because irrespective of how well or how bad you do, your labor costs are fixed. Though this can be subjective at times where you might have some control in terms of your labor becoming a variable cost. Other fixed costs could be things like the maintenance of your shop, etc. If you look at variable costs now, variable costs, as the name suggests, vary with the number of units that you sell. And a good way to think or to further divide variable costs could often be by looking at the entire process that it takes to manufacture till the point of sale of a particular product. So if you were to divide variable cost, you could first divide it as variable cost per unit into number of units produced. And then variable cost per unit can further be divided as, let's say we start from procurement of raw materials. Let's say you're manufacturing cement, for example. So procurement of raw materials for the cement. Then your second cost would be, let's say, manufacturing cost per unit. Then your third cost could be packaging and distribution of that cement. And then finally, you'll have a cost associated with sales and marketing. So that's a good way of, whenever you are thinking of how to break something down on the variable cost front, you can just think along the entire process that is followed from the point of procurement to the point of sales. So that's a general overview of the profit framework.
So you will generally try to be as exhaustive as possible when you are outlining costs, especially, right? So the approach that Saransh just told you is basically following the process from beginning to end to not miss out any steps, essentially, right? So most of the times when you apply the basic framework that we just saw, you will typically reach one end of the branch. It might be sales, it might be price per unit, or it might be variable cost. Now you really want to dig deeper and find out the exact area of problem, right? You want to see the exact reason why sales have gone down or something else has happened, right? So to do that, a lot of times we use the value chain. Let's look at what the value chain means. The value chain has three main components, and this can be applied flexibly to multiple problems. You'll have to change this, tweak this around for different problems. But broadly, it has these three components rather. The first one is production. Like we saw in cost, you start out with production. This will involve procuring raw materials, processing those raw materials, then going through the process of manufacturing your final good, packaging it, and so on. That's your production process, right? Now this will again depend on the problem that you have. Your client might not really do the production himself, that might be a third party, and so on. Anything can happen, but you just have to go through the production process to see whether there's a problem that exists. So there can be a production issue, right? The second one can be a distribution issue. So ask whether your client has third party distribution, or is he doing the distribution himself? Is it done by himself? And in the distribution issue, there can be multiple parts again. So there can be monetary issues. Are incentives offered to our retailers and distributors? Is that incentive less or more compared to our competitors, right? And so on. So that would be your distribution issue. And finally, your product reaches the customers, right? Are the customers really choosing our product? If not, what is the reason that they don't? That is what this part will involve. Here you can benchmark your client's product or service to the competitor's product or service, and then see whether we are really sort of performing as required, right? So these are the three main components of a value chain: production, distribution, and customer pull. You'll go through these to find out your problem, and then you'll sort of locate where it lies, right?
So moving ahead, so often in case solving, you're always thinking, where is the problem? Where is the root? What is the root cause of the problem? Some of the tips that you can use are, you can ask a very relevant question. So for example, is the problem that you're trying to solve for an industry-wide issue, or is it a company specific issue. So if your sales are down by 20%, is the entire cement industry facing that issue, or is it an issue that only your company is facing but your competitors are doing just fine? The reason why this question helps is it enables you to narrow down the set of possible issues. So for example, if you know that your raw material costs are high, and you also know that it's a company specific issue, then your questions will be in the direction of, alright, let's break down our raw materials into its individual components and let's benchmark which of those raw materials is priced higher versus the competition. In the scenario where it's an industry-wide issue, the raw material cost of the entire cement industry has moved ahead, then your questions would be in a different direction. Have the global prices for a particular raw material increased, which is why the entire cement industry is seeing an increase in raw material costs. So it's a very important question which helps you identify and narrow down to a more selected set of potential root causes.
Right. So just to summarize that, there are two main points that you can benchmark to. One is your own client, how was he doing, say 2 years down, like 2 years before or so on. So you can compare with your own past, or you can benchmark with the competitor performance and see where we are going wrong, right? That's about benchmarking. So just to quickly summarize all the three approaches that we've seen today, you will be using combinations or like all of these to solve a profitability problem. You start out with the basic framework, which is splitting profits into revenues and costs, right? In a problem where you've been given that it's a sales problem, don't go with profits, right? Just start with sales, apply the value chain and proceed, right? This next step, like I said, is value chain. Go through each of the buckets in value chain and try to find out where the exact problem lies. In order to find out this exact problem, you might need to benchmark your client's product or the client processes with the competitor or with the client himself in the past, right? Is that clear? All right. So let's move on to a sample case, right? I'll be solving the case today, right? But feel free to sort of jump in and ask any doubts. Do you have any doubts right now? Any questions? All right.
Alright, great. So I'll be giving Mayuresh a profitability problem. We can get started right now.
Right. So, yeah.
So our client is an air conditioner manufacturer.
Okay.
They've seen a recent decline of profits by around 15%.
All right.
And we've been hired to figure out why is this, how they can turn around the situation.
Okay. So just to quickly check whether I've got this right. Our client is an air conditioner manufacturer, right? And the profits have been down for by 15%, and we've been asked to turn around the situation. All right. So I have a few quick questions to understand this problem better.
Sure.
Have these profits been dropping? For how long have these profits been dropping?
We've seen this decline happen over the last 1 year.
1 year. All right. A little bit more about the company. What geographical area do we really work out of?
So we are based in India, and our market as well in terms of customers are all across Indian Tier 1 and Tier 2 urban cities.
Right. And so the product that we sell is ACs, right? Are there any specific variants, or do we sell just one product?
We do have different variants, but for the purpose of this problem, we can assume it to be a standard 2-ton AC.
All right, so we'll average out our numbers.
Right.
Okay, 2-ton AC. Great. And final question here: where in the value chain do we lie when we are an AC manufacturer, right?
Right. So we are manufacturers of this air conditioner, and for distribution and retailing, we have third parties who take care of that for us.
All right. So we just manufacture the AC and we then ship it out to distributors, right?
Right.
All right. Great. Perfect. So I'll just quickly take a minute to sort of get my overall approach correct, and then we can proceed.
As you would have noticed, Mayuresh has gone through the first step of case solving, asking all the right preliminary questions. And 3 important preliminary questions that he is asked is around the value chain, the geography, and about the product. And these are important questions to get an initial look and feel of the company. And he's also going ahead with the second step of case solving, that is outlining the overall approach. And he's nicely taken a couple of minutes to think through of what that approach is going to be. Any questions at this point of time? Yes? We'll probably come to know about that later. He's not asked the question on that.
So I just had a question. Is this an industry-wide problem or a company-specific problem?
That's a good question. So we know that it's a company-specific problem.
Right. Great. So this is my overall approach. I've broken down profits into revenues and costs, right? So profits have gone down by 15%, right? Do we know if there have been changes in revenues and costs?
Sure. So we know that revenues have gone down by approximately 10%.
All right.
And we also know that our costs have gone up by approximately 5%.
Right. So it's a combined effect of both. But it seems like revenues have contributed more to this downfall. So I'm going to go with revenue first. Should I proceed?
All right.
Right.
Sure.
So I've broken down revenues into number of units and price per unit.
Okay.
Right. Have the prices changed over the past 1 year?
Our prices have remained the same.
Right. So this doesn't seem to be the issue clearly. Right. Let's look at whether our sales have decreased. I would assume that they have.
Yes,
right?
that's in fact the case. Our sales have declined by 10%.
Right. So in order to locate where the problem exactly lies in sale decline, I'm going to jump to the value chain now. Just give me a minute to draw that out.
Sure. So Mayuresh, can you help me understand what you're doing here?
Right. So I'll quickly take you through the overall approach. I've broken the sales or the entire process into 3 major parts, which is production, distribution, and customer pull. These are the broad buckets. I'll break these down further into multiple processes, right? And try to understand or locate where the issue exactly lies.
Alright, sounds good.
Right. So I'll just quickly write down a few points here, and then
Out here, we can say that we know to a fair extent that production does not seem to be the issue. We've done our internal checks on that.
Oh, right.
Why do you not go through the other 2 branches?
Right. So this clearly is ruled out, right? Let's look at the distribution and the customer pull. Let's start with distribution. I'll just take a minute to outline a few points.
Alright. So as you see, after having identified that sales is part of the reason why our profits have gone down, and narrowing it down to our number of units having declined, he's now broken it down across the value chain to isolate where in the value chain does the problem lie.
Right. So I would first like to understand this process better of distribution. How exactly do we distribute our product, or who are our distributors?
Right. So we have like tie-ups with 2 or 3 distributors who then further give it to 2 types of retailers, large retailers and then small retailers of electronic items.
Right. So there are 2 main types of retailers, large and small.
Right.
Is there a split, or do we have even distribution across all of them?
So I think we have roughly a 60% split of large, 60% of our sales go through large retailers and 40% go through small retailers.
Right. Is this similar for our competitors?
Yes, the ratio is the same for competition.
Right. And has this changed in the last 1 year?
In the last 1 year, this has remained the same.
Right.
And also for the competition.
Right. So I think the split doesn't seem to be an issue as of now. Let's look at these individual retailers right now. For both the retailers, what is the kind of monetary benefit or incentive that we offer them?
We give them a good enough margin.
Right.
But in recent times, our competition has in fact increased their margins.
Alright. So competitor margins have increased. Right. Is there a particular reason why we have not increased our margins as our competitors have?
We can increase our margin if we want to.
Okay.
It wouldn't affect us much. It was just that we only just came to know that when we were speaking to our retailers that our competition has increased
Definitely.
their margin.
So I think that can be one way to go ahead with it, right? I would like to now understand whether this is the only issue that is happening in the distribution part. Otherwise, I would like to move on to the customer pull, right?
That's a good question, Mayurish. So we don't think that this is the primary issue, mainly
Right.
because the margins that the retailers have got is only a few percentage points greater than us.
Okay.
So I think you can go ahead with the customer pull issue.
Right. So I think this is one of the issues, and we'll come back to the suggestions here later, right? Let's start with the customer pull. What I'm trying to do here is just compare our product with our customers, our competitors, as well as with ourselves 1 year back. And I'll just quickly list out a few parameters based on which we'll compare our product.
Sounds like a great idea.
Just take a few seconds to do that.
Sure. So as you would have noticed that Mayuresh identified that distribution push could be an issue because the margins that we offer to our retailers is lesser compared to what our competition is offering. But he did not stop there. He tried and checked whether this explains the entirety of the sales problem, and there he got the response from the interviewer that we don't think that the margins are significantly different and they do not seem to be the main cause of the problem. And as a result, he's not simply just stopped there, he's moving on to the next branch to try and figure out what is the real cause of the problem.
Alright. So I've just quickly listed out a few key points that I think can be the issues. If none of these are, we can possibly think about more parameters. So firstly, is the physical appearance or size of our AC different from that of our competitors?
I think more or less everyone has a similar kind of physical appearance.
And this hasn't changed, right?
Right.
Alright. How about the capacity and performance? So I know that it's a 2-ton AC and there are
You can
several
assume
ways.
everyone else also has a similar
performance.
performance.
Right?
By performance, what do you mean? You mean the tonnage?
No, as in how the kind of cooling that it offers.
It's on those parameters, we are in fact marginally better.
Oh, all right. In terms of the consumption, I assume that we are selling it to upper middle class and middle class users, right? Is that right?
Right.
So the consumption is really going to matter because
What do you mean by consumption here?
So amount of electricity that it consumes,
Right.
and therefore directly proportional to the bill that they get.
Right.
Has that changed, or is it different from our competitors?
In terms of electricity efficiency, etc., we are almost at par with competition.
Right. So our recurring cost that the end user bears are same.
Right.
How about offers or monetary incentives that we give? Any schemes or discounts that we offer on our product? Is that different from our competitors?
So in terms of price, we are at par with competition, but recently our competition has in fact come up with an EMI scheme where they provide, they allow their customers to purchase an air conditioner over an EMI scheme.
Right. Perfect. I think this seems like a very interesting point because our customers would definitely want something like this. This might be an issue that might have been happening. Just to rule out the last point, are there any after service differences that we have?
In terms of after sales, I
After
think
sales.
we are doing as well as competition.
Right.
But I think this is great. So I think this seems to be one of the reasons which we did not know about.
Right.
So I think that explains why sales could be an issue. Why do we not go and look into the cost side of things as well?
Sure. Let me go ahead and do that.
So that was an example of competitor benchmarking. What Mayuresh did was he tried and identify why our product is not selling as much vis-a-vis the competition. And he made a bunch of reasons why that's so. Everything from price to physical appearance to capacity and performance and after sales service and even offers and schemes. So you would typically want to have a ready list of these things and then prioritize maybe top 2 or 3 of those reasons and then ask the interviewer, are we not performing at par with competition on any of these parameters, and that will more or less help you in trying and identifying the root cause of the problem. We'll now look at how Mayuresh goes ahead with the cost side, because even the costs are higher by 5%. I think that's a fair issue as well, which you can bring out. I think in this case, because the interviewer has told him that this seems to be the main cause of concern, why do you not look at something else? We've moved ahead. But in the case that, let's say these weren't the factors responsible, we can also look at the sales and marketing side of it. To a certain extent, that gets covered in offers and incentive schemes. But things like, for example, brand positioning might be covered in marketing, and that's a fair reason as well. So in this case, we know that it's a company-specific issue, and as a result of that, we benchmark to competition. We can also as well compare it on a timeline basis. It just so happened it wasn't needed in the case, but that's a fair suggestion as well. Let's come back to that at the end. What would be a quantitative response according to you? A question?
Getting into numbers or...
For example? So at certain points we can. So for example, if it was a price issue, we could have asked in terms of how much is the price difference. Because if it's only a 5% difference, it's not significant. If it's a 50% difference, it's significant. So I guess it's case to case dependent. It just so happened it wasn't needed out here. But that's a good idea. Wherever possible, try and quantify the questions.
The interview will sort of lead you to numerical calculations if that is a part of the case. Here I think it's not, so that is why we never went.
No, I don't think that was the case, but let's go into detail at the end of the case.
But I'll just quickly answer that question. Right? So, just to understand what you said, you mean that initially we said that the issue might be in sales, which you think is production predominantly, right? But eventually we just ruled out production, which contradicts the entire thing, right? So, that's not how it goes. So, in sales, there are these three buckets. Either of these can really sort of topple your sales down. You're producing as you were 1 year ago, right? But in terms of distribution, the retailer is just not pushing your product as much, so it's not getting sold. It might be in the shelves, it might be getting returned, but it's not sold, and that is why your revenues are down. So it's not really contradictory. You're producing just as much, it's not getting distributed, right?
So after breaking the fourth wall of interviewing, let's get back into it.
Right. So I have broken the variable costs as follows: the production and packaging costs. In this, this basically involves raw material costs, utilities costs that are involved, labor costs and maintenance costs in our industry. So basically covers all the processes, all the costs involved in our process and products. The second is transportation and distribution costs. This involves one, transportation both from our factory to our distributors and there onwards. And finally, the margins that we give to our distributors, which we sort of talked about. And finally, are there any advertisement, marketing, sales costs that are associated with our product?
Alright, so this looks like a good breakup. What information would you require of me?
Right. So broadly, I would like to know if any of these have changed, both for us and for our competitors. So should I go step by step and start asking questions about each of these, or do we have data on this and we can identify?
So we know that over the last 1 year, production packaging costs have increased.
Packaging costs,
Right.
right. And this is packaging cost per unit, I'm assuming, since this is variable cost, right? Okay. So, right. So I'll just quickly try to understand how the packaging process works, and what are the materials that we use for packaging and how is the process?
So I can let you know that essentially in terms of packaging that we use,
Right.
there's a first layer of a bubble gum wrap, which we then enclose in thermocol, which finally goes into a cardboard which is sealed, and that's how we ship it to our trucks for distribution.
Right. So there are these 3 layers that we talked about. Have any of these changed? Has the wrapping or the thermocol or the seal changed?
So in fact, the cost of the thermocol that we use recently has gone up from our suppliers, as a result of which our packaging cost has increased.
So this has sort of gone up.
Right.
Right. Have the competitors' cost gone up too? I suppose they are using similar suppliers, right?
In terms of when we were doing our research, it seems to be that the packaging cost per unit of our competition is in fact lower than us.
Right. So there seem to be 2 alternatives there. Either they've found new suppliers, or they've substituted this material, or they've found a way about using this material, using new techniques or so on. So do we have any data on what alternatives or competitors are using?
So we know that they've switched to a different kind of a thermocol, which is smaller in thickness, and as a result of that, they are seeing a lower cost of the thermocol in their packaging material.
Right. So thinner thermocol, is it?
Yes.
Does that affect the packaging, or does it lead to spoiling of our product in any way?
That's a good question. So in fact, the material of the thermocol is different. It's a more higher intensity thermocol, as a result of which, even though it's thinner, they are able to it's able to shield the product effectively.
All right. And the cost is also less, right? Is it like a proprietary product that we don't have access to, or we can buy the product?
It's not a proprietary product. I think in fact it's available in the market. We just need to identify the suppliers.
Right. And is a special technique or a new technique required to apply this packaging?
So it's fairly simple. We just need to get the material.
So I don't see any reason why we shouldn't really go ahead with the thinner thermocol. There are no barriers as of now. So
I think this is a good finding.
Right.
This will definitely help us.
Right.
So based on your findings, Mayuresh, why do you not synthesize the case for us?
Sure. I'll just take a minute to quickly organize that.
All right.
So I have 3 main recommendations for the client. First one is we are losing out on our distribution push, and therefore there's a drop in sales. We can change this by increasing the margins of our distributors. Second, we do not offer EMI on our products currently, which is why the customers choose our competitor's product. We should start offering EMI schemes. And third, we should reduce our costs by substituting the thicker thermocol by the new material, that's a thinner thermocol. We have all the necessary resources and technology to do so, and that will greatly reduce our costs as well. A combination of these 3 will bring back our sales and our revenue, and in turn our costs and profits online. Those are all my recommendations.
Thanks, Mayuresh.
Thank you.
All right. So I think that was an overview of the entire case, and that was a good recommendation where he mentioned both on the cost and sales side, what do we need to do. Let's go into a few questions based on this. And also, after the questions, we will be at the end of the case. We'll be at the end of this session. But we do have a practice case for you as well, which what we would do is we'll divide you into 2 groups of interviewers and interviewees. And then we'll give you the case, and then you can give it to the interviewees for the practice of both for everyone.
Right.
But you're free to leave after the FAQs are done.
Yeah. This is because a lot of you ask us at the end of the session, when is a good time to start solving cases with our friends? And I think right now is a very good time, is what I always say. So we'll just have you solve the cases right in front of our eyes. You will form pairs amongst yourselves, and we'll just understand how you can go about solving a case, right? We'll divide you into interviewers and interviewees. And anyone who wants to leave right now can quietly step aside. Any questions about the...
Yeah. Go ahead. In this question, probably not, but it's just a good idea to know that you're dealing with Indian middle class customers who are purchasing air conditioners, who might be more price sensitive to things like EMI possibly a brownie point that you can get if you state an insight like that.
You can never foresee where the case is going, right? So when it started out, I really did not know that it's going to go down into where it did, right? So maybe the case could have been entirely focused on the geography, that we are selling in areas where they don't require ACs, right? We are selling in Kashmir and we are not selling in Mumbai. So that can be the issue. So you can just ask any question that you feel is important, right?
So a question is, in the distribution push branch of the value chain, is monetary incentives.
Let's just let the crowd settle for 5 minutes. Anyone who wants to leave can leave right now, so that everyone settles and we can hear everyone out peacefully, right? So anyone who wants to leave can leave right now.
Profits are
Alright, I think most of you have sort of settled down. Alright, so let's hear questions now. Let's focus for a minute. Yeah.
Yeah, so we have the question
Okay.
coming from the lady that
That left
is-
apparently.
but it's still a relevant question. So, in the distribution branch, you only looked at margins, and is that the only thing that you should look when trying and isolating the problem? So, I think there are two branches out there. Firstly, you have monetary reasons why a distributor might not push your product, and that is the incentive that he gets from the company. But then there are also often non-monetary reasons why a distributor might not be pushing your product. For example, in fact, one of the highest selling products of ITC is their cigarette, right? And one of the ways in which you can get a distributor to push your product is by saying that I will only give you a high selling product if you also stock another product of mine. So although these two products are completely different, but you want to push, let's say, a toffee, what you can tell your retailers and distributors is that I'm going to give you my high selling product only if you bundle the toffee and if you put that also on your retail shop as well. There can be other non-monetary reasons as well, right? So for example, the shelf life of the product. If the shelf life is too small, it means if the product is not selling for the distributor, he's going to lose out on that product. It will be a loss for him. So higher shelf life products are something that distributors might be more keen and retailers might be more keen on stocking. And also you would have noticed that Mayuresh, before he went to margins, he also asked what are the different channels that we use, right? And sometimes if you're not present in a particular channel, that might also be the reasons why your sales are not coming through. Especially given, for example, a lot of bookshops now have to move on to the online e-commerce channel to sell their books as well, because a lot of the market has become such that apart from customers going to bookshops, they're also purchasing a lot of books online. Any other questions?
Can you give a small example where quantifying every step would be necessary?
Yeah,
Okay,
where the
and
interviewer keeps on giving you data. So for example, if the number of units and price per unit have changed, let's consider a proper example, right? I say that your client is a fruit juice manufacturer and he wants to increase his profit by say 20%. I give you a number and then I give you your current revenue. I give you your revenue split by two flavors that we sell, right? Strawberry and orange. And then I give you the units sold, different packages in those units. and also tell you that in the next 2 years we want to increase our profits, right, by 10-20%. So how would you go about it? Then you will sort of explore different avenues through this framework, try to do a calculation about what is the additional cost that we are adding to increase this revenue. Is going to bring in more profits, or are we going to go into losses, and so on. So the interview, this same case can in fact be pretty quantitative, but the interviewer will clearly guide you to, you will clearly realize that it's a quantitative case or a qualitative case. Don't try to push the other way around. Like if you are realizing that it's a qualitative case, don't try to make it quantitative for the sake of it, and the other way around.
Let's just consider this example itself, right? Let's say the interviewer asks that how do you justify that EMI seems to be seems to be a significant issue out here. So one of the quantitative pieces of information you could ask is, do we know that for our competition, what percentage of their sales are coming from the EMI scheme versus a direct purchase? And if that's a significant 15-20%, then that is indicative of the fact that EMI is an important metric out here. So I think it's good to be quantitative, but also gauge in terms of where the interviewer is taking you, and then go with that flow.
Right. Parman.
So that's where the interviewer's role comes in. So there are two parts to your question, right? So for example, he first broke the cost as fixed cost and variable cost per unit. And there the first question you ask is, which of these costs have changed? Because your overall costs have reduced by 5%. And there, I don't know if this happened in this interview, but there the interview then tells you that our fixed costs have remained the same, our variable costs have in fact gone up. And so you then eliminate fixed costs as a branch and you go into variable cost and so forth.
Here it was a logical elimination because profits have dropped only since the last 1 year. So fixed cost couldn't have really been the issue. But I tried to verify that, and he sort of validated that assumption, right? So that's fine.
For example, had we had an advertising agency come to us and ask a similar question, what would be the value change for that?
So your client is an advertising agency, and they have seen a decline of profits. So I guess in that sense, alright, this is in fact a very interesting question. So your client is a company which is into the advertising business. They themselves have advertising clients who come to them for different products. Let's say what would be their value chain out here? You know that their overall sales have declined. How do you break the revenues for this particular client? There are no units, right? Or what is the equivalent of unit out here? Anyone would want to give a suggestion? Breaking down revenue into its component parts for an advertising agency client.
Number of projects the advertising firm gets.
Sorry, can you complete that?
Number of brands that it is dealing with.
Brands. So what would be a mathematical formula? Revenue of advertising agency is equal to?
Number of projects into the cost of an average advertising project. Also the number of brands that it is partnering with, and then again the cost of an advertising project.
Alright, that's a fair suggestion. Anyone has a different approach? Go ahead.
I would need to know what kind of advertising agency is it. So is it the...
So let's say it's a standard advertising agency. They have clients that come into them and they pay a fee for any particular project. How would you go about it now?
So then the thing is, so I wanted to know whether if suppose this is they advertise on a hoarding or a billboard kind of thing. So the number of billboards they are able to sell into the price they are charging for per billboard. So I was, or
Right.
if it is a TV marketing thing, so number
Correct.
of seconds they have.
Correct. So typically you would want a structure which can also take that eventuality into account. So I would say the ideal framework is something similar to what he said. Total number of clients multiplied by average revenue per client, and then total number of clients can be further broken down into average revenue per project multiplied by number of projects per client, right? And then average revenue per like in fact before you break down your total revenue per client, you can probably break it as revenue from billboards, revenue from let's say social media, etc. And then you can ask the interviewer what would be the appropriate breakdown.
I think this is a fair framework for the basic profitability, but I think we digressed from the question. What he asked was, what is the value chain for this kind of a company, right? That was the question. So a value chain for this, a good way to think about value chain is how does the process start, how does it end? So for a marketing company, I would think of it this way. It starts with a source or a referral. How are customers or clients getting to know about us, right? This can involve things like what are the different sources through which they come to know about us, newsletters, online sources, Google search, word of mouth, or so on. The next thing is they actually come and sign with us, right? So our proposal is the second thing that they choose upon. Then the service that we provide, are our designers, are our marketing experts good enough for them? Finally, the after service, once the engagement is over, do we really provide good after sales service, right? And finally, billing, is our billing up, like is it okay with the industry standard and so on? So I think this would be a good sort of value chain for this kind of a company, right? Just think about where it starts and where it ends. That will give you the value chain. Yeah, so it will come under service. Probably break it down into what are the different services that we offer in marketing. So do we offer online marketing? Do we print things and so on? Then in each of those, where does the problem lie?
So as long as your structure is MECE, depending on where does the billboard is coming or depending on where does the actual service come in, is just a matter of choice. As long as you are taking into all eventualities into account, that's fine.
And value chains are not exactly MECE as such. Like they are not A and universal set minus A. It's more or less, it's only exhaustive a lot of times, and there are certain overlaps also in value chains. So they are just exhaustive view of the entire process and not MECE breakdowns as such. That's a key difference between your basic framework and your values, right? And that's why they are easier to make as against a MECE coding. That sort of requires a logical breakdown.
So coming back to the earlier case, when we are considering the distribution factor, why did we consider inventory accumulation at our godowns or at the retailer level? We directly get into the retailers and the selling product to the mass market retailers. But there might be a case where our godowns are filled with the inventories and the inventories were not distributed to the retailers.
Right. So that is still a distribution issue, right?
Yeah.
Distribution or transportation issue. The interviewer never led the case to go to somewhere similar to that. Or it could have been a part of the production issue rather, right? Storage is a part of your production process, right?
Let's say you can frame it. Let's give a hypothetical scenario where the problem was that we have all of this inventory in our godown, but for some reason it's not reaching our distributors. And the root problem was that 10 of our drivers did not turn up for work, and there is a strike perhaps, and as a result of that, your products are not going down. In which case, then the interviewer would have asked you to focus on the production bucket of it, and then you would have probably divided production into its main components, the end component being storage, and to check if inventory was an issue, you would have asked the question of what are our inventory levels at the moment, and if they are at 100%, let's say, which means that our inventory is then not shipping out, and that would have been the flow there. Yeah, one question.
What would have been the case if the production part, how to break down the production part?
Right.
The production part.
I'll answer that. So to break down the production part again, if you notice, I asked him when we were looking at the packaging part of it, right? I asked him the question, I don't really know about the packaging industry here. Can you tell me more about it? So similarly for the production part here, you don't really know this business inside out. So you can ask what is the production process like. Probably give you a major breakdown of processes that are involved. Then for each of those processes, you can outline costs. But broadly in production, the following costs are involved: raw materials, utilities like electricity, water, and stuff like that, right? Labor costs, storage costs, and the cost for wear and tear and maintenance of the equipment. So equipment costs, right? These are broadly the costs that are involved in production typically. There might obviously be other costs which are specific to a business, right? Yeah.
There might be some resultant losses which might be happening because of causal losses, right? So suppose there is some losses in the ahead buckets, but those are being reflected in the previous buckets. So we have to identify which is the causal loss of those resultant, but we might have end up, so should we distinguish
Can you give one specific
Yeah,
example
very-
where this might happen?
My distribution is not, my storage warehouses capacity is very less, so I'm not able to produce more. So the impact will also be on production.
Correct. So then the way it would get reflected is the resultant out there would be your sales have declined. Right? The net impact of that is your sales have declined. And why have your sales declined? Because it's a production issue. And why is it a production issue? Because your storage is not enough that you're able to produce enough and then stock them and then sell it. So your production is constrained by your storage space in that situation. Is that fair?
Look upon the causal loss of revenue.
Yeah, you have to eventually look at the causal problems, right? In case solving is a lot like interrogation. You have to be suspicious about everything and circle back to the problem which was the root cause of everything, right? So that's your mindset when you're solving a case, especially profitability, right? So you do have to come back to that cause, the root cause of things, right?
Alright, maybe we can just take a last question and then we could break for a practice case.
The advertising value chain that you've drawn, what do you mean by after service? I didn't really understand.
So say, for example, I am a marketing agent or I am a design agency, right? And I provide design services. Now, post my engagement, I've sent all my deliverables, right? Now, after a few months, the client needs a few changes in their deliverables. So do I do it? Do I have a specific price scheme for that? Or rather, in a very everyday example, sort of, you purchase a bike or a car, right? And how the company treats you after you purchase it is really important, right? Do they provide regular checkups? Do they give you servicing for free? That is all after sales service, right?
Even things like, for example, if you purchased an air conditioner, what are the guarantee and the warranty schemes on that?
Right.
That is the after sales service.
Yeah, warranty is a good point, yes.
Alright, I think we had one last question.
What if, we said some reason there in customer and while asking with the interviewer, we realize that these are not exhaustive. How do you feel? Because what if given us not the answer and all the findings you listed or not?
In fact, that was the case this time, right? And in fact, I sort of approached this myself. These might not be exhaustive, but I feel these are a few critical issues that we should address beforehand. If these are not, we can sort of brainstorm ahead if needed.
And,
So, yeah.
like the first time that you'll be solving this, you'll probably be getting a lot of practice over the next, you'll probably be doing 10 cases. So it's always a good idea to have a ready list and according to you an exhaustive list of what could be the potential reasons.
Right.
And you can almost like just remember that so that when the situation arises, you can make that exhaustive list. It will 95% cover all your situations. But the important thing there is, instead of going through each of those 15 questions, try and prioritize the top 5 or the top 3 that are more important. So that that is where your business judgment comes in, where you're sort of prioritizing that these top 3 might be the most important differentiators for customers.
Right.
Alright guys, thank you so much for attending this session.